By the late 1950s, a number of expeditions confirmed finding residual traces of radiation throughout the blast region. A mystified Korolev is unable to explain the occurrence through any natural means. He concludes that the blast must have been caused by the crash of an extraterrestrial vehicle.
Once radiation traces were found out there, my superiors instructed a team of us to lock down the whole place and to take possession of all objects that were ever collected from the site. We told all of the people there who saw the object years ago to say that it was only a big meteor. Otherwise, they would get a free ticket to a Siberian prison camp. We thought for sure that we would find some alien body parts or spacecraft chunks or nuclear bomb parts. And the last thing we wanted to do was to share any findings with the Americans.
Many of the scientists involved in this investigation of Tunguska lose their jobs or are invited by the KGB to a long-term expedition deep in Siberia. TASS, the Soviet government-controlled newspaper, does an about-face, stating several times that the explosion is not a UFO after all, but is simply the result of a comet or asteroid impact. These reports help solidify this now long-accepted official story of the Tunguska blast.
We did collect some papers and samples of odd-shaped metal and rock pieces, but I never did find out whatever happened to any of that, or whether or not anyone else found out about what the story was. All I was told to do was to have people not say that it was a UFO. We had all of the materials sent to a secret military base just south of Vanavara in Siberia, but I don't know what happened to it since then.
That area became the top secret area in the Soviet Union. And people were brought in there, including their families. And security was extremely tight. The United States, trying to get information, set up listening posts. And then, of course, using the U-2 spy plane, overflew the area. But the Russians spent a tremendous amount of effort isolating the test area and keeping everything as secret as they could, out of the even the prying eyes of people in Moscow.
You know, when we talk about the secrecy, we must begin to talk about the society. And we have this history for the decades. It was anti-capitalist, it was anti-Japan, it was anti-German. Everybody was suspicious to each other. So in living in all this history, it was impossible then to change everything. So when Khrushchev came to power, he made our society much less closed. But before, everything was secret. Now, still many things remain secret which had no explanation.
For over 3 generations, the Russians have successfully kept the facts about Tunguska from the world. Scientists and experts from around the globe spin their wheels writing papers and treatises in an attempt to explain the explosion and crash site by natural means. The most popular explanation of this event, the official story, is that it is caused by either an asteroid or comet. Comets and asteroids are essentially leftover debris from the birth of our solar system 4.5 billion years ago, when a giant star exploded, leaving an enormous ball of dust, which ultimately evolves into our sun and planets.
The Earth orbits the sun in a sort of cosmic shooting gallery, with comets and asteroids coming by all the time. At any particular moment, there's likely to be 1 or 2 between us and the moon that are 30 or 40 feet in diameter or larger. We don't usually distinguish between comets and asteroids because once it hits, it really doesn't matter what it was. Asteroids are made of rocky material, comets are made of icy material, but if you're hit by one, it really doesn't matter any more than you would care if you were shot, whether the bullet that shot you was made of lead or steel.
If you look at the moon, it's heavily cratered. If you look at Mars, heavily cratered. Mercury's heavily cratered. The Earth was also heavily cratered. It's just that here on Earth, the effect of all the erosional processes and the tectonic processes which create mountains and earthquakes have erased the record. But in fact, the Earth would have looked just like those other bodies had it not been for the weathering and the tectonic processes, the geophysical processes.
The largest well-documented impact was 65 million years ago. We don't know if it was a comet or an asteroid, but we do know that it struck the Earth in the Yucatan region of Mexico, producing a crater about 150 miles across, and that it created such a profound environmental catastrophe that most life on Earth came to an end. The majority of the species went extinct, including the dinosaurs.
There have been several instances of comets and asteroids smacking the Earth. The most recent, perhaps, is the so-called Tunguska event in Russian Siberia, where in 1908, an object probably the size of several houses smacked into the Earth's atmosphere and caused an explosion that knocked down trees for 30 miles in either direction. And this was an object that was only about 60 meters in size, just over the half the size of a football field. And it didn't even hit the Earth because it broke up in the Earth's atmosphere.
Meteors smack into the Earth or disintegrate in the atmosphere all the time. There's nothing new or surprising about that. What then makes the Tunguska blast so unique? Why was it kept a secret for so long?
Scientists offer one explanation, that an asteroid about the size of a 25-story building, comprised of a loose conglomeration of small rocks and minerals, enters the Earth's atmosphere on a collision course with our planet. Due to atmospheric friction, the object heats up to several thousand degrees and explodes, disintegrating in a huge ball of fire. It is indeed possible that a rock weighing about 1 million tons could create such explosive power, and that it could even leave radioactive traces. And while this is still the cleanest and simplest explanation to accept, there are numerous evidentiary contradictions that oppose the asteroid theoretical conclusion. Normally, when an asteroid enters the Earth's atmosphere, it heats up to incredible temperatures and explodes at a very high altitude. If the meteor is very large, it slams into the Earth, dredging up billions of tons of soil and rock.
Perhaps the best-known example is Meteor Crater in Arizona. That was made by an impact of an iron object about 100 feet across. And it exploded with an energy that we can estimate from the crater itself as about 15 megatons, about the size of the largest nuclear bombs. It left a scar. It's 50,000 years old, and there are half dozen other craters on the Earth of similar age that are also easily seen.
Virtually all of the other impact traces endured by Earth are erased almost as quickly as they appear, such that all impacts, except the most recent, go unnoticed.
Any object larger than about 50 feet across, with an explosive energy then of the order of several megatons, equivalent to a large nuclear bomb, is able to penetrate through our atmosphere and to explode either in the lower atmosphere or at the surface. So when one of those penetrations takes place, we end up with the equivalent of a large nuclear bomb going off, which of course could do terrible damage.
It is almost inconceivable that an object the size of a 25-story building and weighing over 1 million tons would disintegrate into dust particles without leaving any debris. The Arizona crater was caused by a meteor only 1/4 the size of the one theorized to have caused the Tunguska explosion, and that meteor made it to the surface intact. This contributes to the questionable nature of this explanation. A meteor could not change course as many of the eyewitnesses testified. Neither could it create the atmospheric oddities associated with the event. Primarily made up of a loose collection of rocks, a meteor would not disrupt the Earth's magnetic field, nor create geomagnetic storms as occurred in the skies over Tunguska.
Recently, the suggestion was made that it was actually a chunk of a comet that smashed into the Earth. And in fact, it never really hit the ground, but it blew up a mile or so above the surface. And that is exactly what you would expect of something frail, like a great big chunk of ice like that.
Comets are made of rock and ice. Their spectacular tail occurs when the solar wind evaporates bits of ice, then blows these particles back for millions of kilometers. Scientists believe that there are trillions of comets beyond the furthest planet in a formation known as the Oort cloud. Periodically, one is dislodged from its distant orbit and is hurled toward the sun. A typical comet makes only one pass through the inner solar system during its lifetime.
Something on the order of, let's say, 10 meters in size would certainly not make it through the Earth's atmosphere, and probably something getting up to 50 meters would explode in the Earth's atmosphere, and you would have a shower of little debris coming down, but nothing that could create a large crater. Now, if we start moving up in size, something on the order of 100 meters in size will certainly make it through the Earth's atmosphere, unless perhaps if it's cometary and it's very, very fragile. Something about 80 meters in size impacted over Siberia in 1908, the Tunguska event.
While pieces from the tail of a comet can cause reactions in the upper atmosphere prior to entry and explosion, the comet theory does present other ambiguities which point to the rejection of this explanation. Comets are defined by the visual spectacle they create, with their brightness and long tail. It is therefore extremely unlikely that a comet could suddenly sneak up on the Earth without being witnessed from elsewhere on the planet. A comet, consisting mainly of ice, cannot cause the extraordinary geomagnetic storms, such as those which occurred over Tunguska, nor can it leave behind radioactive traces. Furthermore, a comet, once subject to Earth's gravitational pull, cannot change its course. Computer simulations clearly demonstrate that a comet of the size required to create this blast would disintegrate much higher in the atmosphere than the object that exploded over Tunguska. One of the more exotic explanations for the explosion is that particles of antimatter somehow formed over the Tunguska region, then exploded when they came in contact with the positive matter molecules in the atmosphere. It is well documented in the scientific community that antimatter particles coming into contact with positive matter particles cancel each other out, potentially creating a massive explosion. This proposal stems from the residual radiation left over after the Tunguska explosion, the lack of a crater, and the lack of any eyewitness report of a mushroom cloud. The antimatter theory does not account for the atmospheric or geomagnetic oddities associated with the Tunguska explosion, or the eyewitness observations of an object streaking across the sky. With the lack of any rational explanation of how these antimatter particles formed, and the fact that these particles would have caused an explosion at a much higher point in the atmosphere, this theory may be dismissed based on the conflicting evidence. One of the least likely natural phenomena proposed to have caused this explosion is that of a mini black hole said to have come in contact with Tunguska. Black holes are tremendously dense objects, such that a mass the size of the Earth could fit into this space the size of a tennis ball. Their gravitational pull is so strong it can distort even light waves. Since the gravitational force and mass required to create a black hole is so enormous, it is virtually impossible for a pin-sized black hole to exist. A black hole any larger than a pin coming close to the Earth would certainly have catastrophic planetary consequences. For this and other reasons, the black hole theory can also be dismissed as having no relevant merits. Since the available evidence for any naturally occurring explanation is conflicting and contradictory, some experts propose man-made causes